I will not allow people to change and create hatred in our hearts.
Masks do not have the ability to reduce your oxygen. That is medically false. A public service announcement, if I can, about mask wearing and oxygen saturation. This on my finger records the oxygen saturation of my blood and my heart rate. This top number is the oxygen saturation. Anything between 94 and 100 is completely normal. I have no respiratory conditions, so for me, it sits around 99. The bottom number is my heart rate. Anything above 100 is too fast, and mine is fast because I'm pissed off that I'm having to record this video. Now, I'm going to put a mask on, something that I do routinely, seeing as I work as a surgeon, and I'm going to show you that actually this oxygen saturation number doesn't change. Masks do not have the ability to reduce your oxygen. That is medically false. Stop making stuff up. Stop listening to people who are making stuff up, and stop turning this into a political issue. Masks help protect you and protect others. If you're told to wear them, do so. Stop being selfish.
If we could get everybody to wear a mask right now, I really do think over the next 4, 6, 8 weeks we could bring this epidemic under control.
I am here because I have to show my parents that I am their daughter and that they did not raise me to accept abuse from men. About 2 days ago, I was walking up the steps of the Capitol when Representative Yoho suddenly turned a corner, and he was accompanied by Representative Roger Williams, and accosted me on the steps right here in front of our nation's Capitol. I was minding my own business, walking up the steps, and Representative Yoho put his finger in my face. He called me disgusting. He called me crazy. He called me out of my mind. And he called me dangerous. And then he took a few more steps, and after I had recognized his comments as rude, he walked away and said, "I'm rude. You're calling me rude." I took a few steps ahead, and I walked inside and cast my vote. I walked back out, and there were reporters in the front of the Capitol, and in front of reporters, Representative Yoho called me, and I quote, "a fucking bitch." These were the words that Representative Yoho levied against a congresswoman, the congresswoman that not only represents New York's 14th congressional district, but every congresswoman and every woman in this country, because all of us have had to deal with this in some form, some way, some shape, at some point in our lives. And I want to be clear that Representative Yoho's comments were not deeply hurtful or piercing to me, because I have worked a working class job. I have waited tables in restaurants. I have ridden the subway. I have walked the streets in New York City. And this kind of language is not new. I have encountered words uttered by Mr. Yoho and men uttering the same words as Mr. Yoho while I was being harassed in restaurants. I have tossed men out of bars that have used language like Mr. Yoho's. And I have encountered this type of harassment riding the subway in New York City. This is not new. And that is the problem. Mr. Yoho was not alone. He was walking shoulder to shoulder with Representative Roger Williams. And that's when we start to see that this issue is not about one incident. It is cultural. It is a culture of lack of impunity, of accepting of violence and violent language against women, and an entire structure of power that supports that. Because not only have I been spoken to disrespectfully, particularly by members of the Republican Party and elected officials in the Republican Party, not just here, but the President of the United States last year told me to go home to another country, with the implication that I don't even belong in America. The governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, before I even was sworn in, called me a whatever that is. Dehumanizing language is not new. And what we are seeing is that incidents like these are happening in a pattern. This is a pattern of an attitude towards women and dehumanization of others. So while I was not deeply hurt or offended by little comments that are made, when I was reflecting on this, I honestly thought that I was just going to pack it up and go home. It's just another day, right? But then yesterday, Representative Yoho decided to come to the floor of the House of Representatives and make excuses for his behavior. And that I could not let go. I could not allow my nieces, I could not allow the little girls that I go home to, I could not allow victims of verbal abuse and worse to see that excuse, and to see our Congress accept it as legitimate and accept it as an apology, and to accept silence as a form of acceptance. I could not allow that to stand, which is why I am rising today to raise this point of personal privilege. And I do not need Representative Yoho to apologize to me. Clearly, he does not want to. Clearly, when given the opportunity, he will not. And I will not stay up late at night waiting for an apology from a man who has no remorse over calling women and using abusive language towards women. But what I do have issue with is using women, our wives and daughters, as shields and excuses for poor behavior. Mr. Yoho mentioned that he has a wife and 2 daughters. I am 2 years younger than Mr. Yoho's youngest daughter. I am someone's daughter too. My father, thankfully, is not alive to see how Mr. Yoho treated his daughter. My mother got to see Mr. Yoho's disrespect on the floor of this house towards me on television. And I am here because I have to show my parents that I am their daughter and that they did not raise me to accept abuse from men. Now, what I am here to say is that this harm that Mr. Yoho tried to levy against me was not just an incident directed at me. But when you do that to any woman, what Mr. Yoho did was give permission to other men to do that to his daughters. In using that language in front of the press, he gave permission to use that language against his wife, his daughters, women in his community. And I am here to stand up to say that is not acceptable. I do not care what your views are. It does not matter how much I disagree or how much it incenses me or how much I feel that people are dehumanizing others. I will not do that myself. I will not allow people to change and create hatred in our hearts. And so what I believe is that having a daughter does not make a man decent. Having a wife does not make a decent man. Treating people with dignity and respect makes a decent man. And when a decent man messes up, as we all are bound to do, he tries his best and does apologize. Not to save face, not to win a vote. He apologizes genuinely to repair and acknowledge the harm done so that we can all move on. Lastly, what I want to express to Mr. Yoho is gratitude. I want to thank him for showing the world that you can be a powerful man and accost women. You can have daughters and accost women without remorse. You can be married and accost women. You can take photos and project an image to the world of being a family man and accost women without remorse and with a sense of impunity. It happens every day in this country. It happened here on the steps of our nation's capital. It happens when individuals who hold the highest office in this land admit to hurting women and using this language against all of us.
That was brilliance, grace, intelligence, and complete dedication to what justice, equality, and dignity in the United States looks like. That is our colleague, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and we are so grateful to her for her voice.
President Trump has been trying to rewrite the timeline on his coronavirus response.
I think our whole group has been spectacular.
So here are the facts. In 2014, the Obama-Biden administration put together the Global Health Security Unit within the White House National Security Council.
We have to put in place an infrastructure, not just here at home, but globally, that allows us to see it quickly, isolate it quickly, respond to it quickly.
They also assembled a 69-page pandemic response playbook. Now, in 2018, President Trump fired the Global Health Security Unit.
I'm a business person. I don't like having thousands of people around when you don't need them.
He also declined to renew CDC epidemic prevention funding, causing it to downsize in 39 countries, including China. Now, reporting from ABC suggests that intelligence officials were warning about this new disease emerging from China as early as November 2019.
Nobody would have ever thought a thing like this could have happened.
The administration has disputed that, but we know that at least as early as January 3rd, the White House National Security Council was briefed. In January, before Germany had a single case of the coronavirus, they began working on a test. January 8th, the CDC issued its first warning. On January 9th, the World Health Organization issued its first warning. And that night, President Trump held a rally.
And America's future has never, ever looked brighter.
On January 10th, the World Health Organization issued a comprehensive package of technical guidance with advice to all countries for how to detect, test, and manage potential cases. January 18th, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar tried to have an urgent phone call with the president about the crisis. The president reportedly cut him off to berate him about his efforts to ban flavored vaping products. President Trump then hung up and went golfing. January 19th, President Trump went golfing again. January 20th, this was the first confirmed case of the coronavirus in the U.S. It was also the first confirmed case of the coronavirus in South Korea. The response of the two countries could not be more different. Within the first 2 weeks of that case, South Korea had implemented nationwide testing. Perhaps that's why, as of the beginning of May 2020, South Korea has fewer than 250 deaths, while the United States has had over 65,000. Given the difference in population size, you would expect the U.S. to have a death rate 6 times that of South Korea. Instead, it is over 250 times that of South Korea. On January 22nd, asked whether he was worried, President Trump said,
No, we're not at all, and we have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine.
On January 23rd, China shut down all of Wuhan. The World Health Organization held an international news conference, and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called for a public health emergency. President Trump did not declare it. On January 24th, President Trump tweeted, China has been working hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will all work out well. On January 27th, Joe Biden wrote an op-ed warning that President Trump was failing to take this crisis seriously and needed to take more immediate action. On January 28th, Elizabeth Warren released her coronavirus plan. That night, President Trump held another rally. On January 29th, President Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, sent an urgent White House memo warning of the risk of the virus. Only then was a task force formed. January 30th, China locked down all of Hubei province. The World Health Organization declared a global health emergency. That night, President Trump held a rally. February 1st, Trump goes golfing. February 2nd, only then did a partial travel restriction on China go into effect.
Well, we pretty much shut it down, coming in from China.
39 countries had travel restrictions on China earlier or at the same time, and many had much more comprehensive restrictions. At least 430,000 people arrived in the U.S. from China since January 1st. This included nearly 40,000 in the 2 months after President Trump's travel restrictions. While he claims that they saved thousands of lives, Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo, an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins, says, quote, we have not seen any evidence that shows that the travel restrictions stopped or slowed down transmission of the virus. February 3rd, the World Health Organization released a strategic preparedness and response plan. February 5th, Secretary Azar requested $4 billion to fight the virus. This led to a shouting match in the White House. February 6th, the World Health Organization began distributing 250,000 tests around the world. The U.S. didn't want any. We'd produce our own. Around that time, the CDC produced a total of 90 tests, which turned out to be faulty. February 10th, President Trump proposed a budget that would cut CDC funding by 16%. That day, he said,
The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
February 15th, President Trump went golfing. February 19th, he held another rally. February 20th, he held another rally. February 23rd, Peter Navarro sounded another alarm within the White House, warning of the increasing probability of a full-blown COVID-19 pandemic. Only the next day does President Trump finally ask Congress for additional funding. But that same day, he tweeted, the coronavirus is very much under control in the USA. Stock market starting to look very good to me. On February 26th,
you treat this like a flu. Because of all we've done, the risk to the American people remains very low. We think that in almost all cases, the better we're getting. We have a total of 15.
There were more than 15 cases that day. There were 60. And now there are 1.1 million. February 27th.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
February 28th.
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. And this is their new hoax.
The very next day was the first confirmed U.S. death. Washington State declared a state of emergency. March 4th, he did an interview with Fox News where he suggested that it might be okay to go to work with the coronavirus.
We have thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that get better just by, sitting around and even going to work. Some of them go to work, but they get better.
March 5th, California and Maryland declared states of emergency. March 6th, Kentucky and Utah declared states of emergency. He went to visit the CDC wearing a campaign hat and said,
Anybody right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're there. They have the test.
It wasn't true then. In May, it's still not true. March 7th, New York declares a state of emergency and President Trump goes golfing. March 8th, he golfed again. March 9th, he compared coronavirus to the flu in a tweet and suggested it would go away on its own. March 10th.
It will go away, just stay calm, it will go away.
On March 11th, the World Health Organization said it was not just a global health emergency, it was a pandemic.
WHO has been assessing this outbreak around the clock, and we're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
Only on March 13th does President Trump finally declare a national emergency. On March 16th, in a call with governors, he tells them,
respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, try getting it yourselves.
On March 17th, he finally admitted this is a pandemic, and he told reporters,
I've always known this is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. All you had to do is look at other countries.
This is only days after he was still comparing it to the flu. On March 26th, President Trump delivered on his America First promise in a way no one could have wanted, as the U.S. overtook the entire rest of the world in cases of coronavirus. As of the beginning of May, the U.S. has 1.1 million cases of the coronavirus and has suffered over 65,000 deaths. Analysis of data from the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation suggests that 90% of the U.S. deaths could have been prevented if the president had issued physical distancing guidelines even 2 weeks earlier, when he had already been warned of the threat for months.
With all of that, it's been an incredible period of time. We've done a fantastic job.
We cut off people's utilities this week and made them pay what could have been their last check to us to turn their lights on in a global health pandemic. But you don't care about that and you didn't want to meet.
Can we do better? There's always things that pop up that we can do better on, and I call the question.
I'm sorry, that's not how this works. We each have an opportunity to speak 5 minutes.
I thought we did.
Yeah, the question's been
I'm
called.
I'm sorry. That's not how calling the question works. You need a second and you need to vote on it.
Then I have a second for calling
so
the
are
question.
you telling me that you're going to keep me from talking right now?
You've talked all evening.
Look here. You're calling me disrespectful because I've interrupted people, but this gentleman has turned off people's lights in the middle of a global health pandemic. That's what that gentleman did.
Point of order.
And you think I'm disrespectful for interrupting?
Point of order.
This gentleman has had the ability to do any number of things. We could have banned large gatherings. We could have closed the beach. We could have put a moratorium on utility shutoffs.
I recessed.
Also not within your power, and the attorney has held that that's true.
I recessed the meeting.
You came up with new rules at the beginning of the meeting, and then you didn't even want to follow the rules that you came up with.
And you took advantage.
This is a banana republic is what you're turning this place into with your so-called leadership.
Does a recess mean that we will be...
Yes.
Camera on that?
I don't care anything about this.
On that?
I don't care anything about this.
Does
We should have been talking about this last week.
Can we...
We cut off people's utilities this week and made them pay what could have been their last check to us to turn their lights on in a global health pandemic. But you don't care about that and you didn't want to meet. But every other year you go around and beg people for their votes.
Can we explain
But
the
you care
recess?
more about your relationship with that guy than you care about the relationship with the people who don't go to work in this building.
Order! You are done. You're done. You're done. Disrespectful.
It's disrespectful is what you've done to the working people in the city.
I didn't do anything.
You failed to act.
I didn't do anything.
When you're a leader, you failed to act. You said you didn't do anything. You failed to act. When you had an opportunity.
Party for state. I'm calling on you to provide strong leadership in this time of public health emergency. Please declare a state of emergency for the city of Lake Worth Beach and achieve the following: enacting a moratorium on utility shutoffs, curtail Operation Red Tag, extend paid emergency leave to city employees who must be out of work, ban gatherings of large groups of people, mandate the restaurants and bars operate at half capacity or use emergency powers to shut them down completely, Reach out to the health department and ICE about protections for undocumented residents who may test positive for the disease. The time for astute, informed, bold action was really a week ago already. Please halt all utility and code fines and evictions. We have a global crisis. All people need assurance that their housing and utilities and food sources are secure, and your delayed response is as best shameful as worse, perhaps fatal for some. I think it's unconscionable to be penalizing residents by shutting off their utilities. Everyone should have access to power and water to ensure that they can stay healthy and safe.
The only time religious freedom is invoked is in the name of bigotry and discrimination. I'm tired of it. And experiencing this hearing, and I'm struggling whether I respond or launch into this question as a legislator or from the perspective of a woman of faith. Because I cannot, it's very difficult to sit here and listen to arguments in the long history of this country of using scripture and weaponizing and abusing scripture to justify bigotry. White supremacists have done it. Those who justified slavery did it. Those who fought against integration did it. And we're seeing it today. And sometimes, especially in this body, I feel as though if Christ himself walked through these doors and said what he said thousands of years ago, that we should love our neighbor and our enemy, that we should welcome the stranger, fight for the least of us, that it is easier for a rich man, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into a kingdom of heaven, he would be maligned as a radical and rejected from these doors. And I know, and it is part of my faith, that all people are holy and all people are sacred, unconditionally. And that is what makes faith sometimes, that's what prompts us to transform, because it is unconditional. It's not about that it is up to us to love parts of people. We love all people. There is nothing holy about rejecting medical care of people, no matter who they are on the grounds of what their identity is. There is nothing holy about turning someone away from a hospital. There's nothing holy about rejecting a child from a family. There's nothing holy about writing discrimination into the law. And I am tired of communities of faith being weaponized and being mischaracterized because the only time religious freedom is invoked is in the name of bigotry and discrimination. I'm tired of it. My faith commands me to treat Mr. Minton as holy because he is sacred, because his life is sacred, because you are not to be denied anything that I am entitled to, that we are equal in the eyes of the law, and we are equal in my faith in the eyes of the world. And so I just have to get that out ahead of time, because it is deeply disturbing, not just what is happening here, but what this administration is advancing is the idea that religion and faith is about exclusion. It is not up to us. It is not up to us to deny medical care. It is up to us to feed the hungry, to clothe the poor, to protect children, and to love all people as ourselves.
Politics, unfortunately, is often theater.
I don't see this as theater as you described, Senator Cruz. I see this as the real world. I sit in a position on this committee where I often follow Senator Cruz, and I often have to throw out my entire plan for what I was going to say because of what he said, but I have never had an experience quite like this one. I could choose to start by taking on his interpretation of history because of the fact that the only other time that we have had a justice die this close to an election was when Abraham Lincoln, a wise, wise leader, was president. What did he do? He waited until after the election. What is unique, in your words, Senator Cruz, about this situation? People are voting right now. Democracy is happening right now. And we in this room are supposed to be stewards of this democracy. And to have the chairman of this committee lead this discussion on this solemn day when tomorrow the first woman in the history of the nation will lie in state and raise the fact that, yes, this may end up in court. And then to hear you, Senator Cruz, talk about how this because of some war game that you're talking about that I've never even heard about, that this can end up in court. Well, guess what? I will not concede that this is going to end up in court. You know why? Because the people are voting in droves right now. They are voting all over this country because President Trump is behind in states, in red states that no one even thought he could be behind in. Why? Because the people of this country are fighting back because they know what's on the line. I am not going to give up on this democracy despite these false lies about the Democratic candidate for president. It is President Trump who chose to clear out peaceful protesters and wave a Bible in front of a church. It is President Trump who, after Charlottesville, said there are two sides. Well, there's not two sides when one side is the Ku Klux Klan. It is President Trump who's put out there that military and soldiers should be at the voting places in a pure attempt to suppress the vote. So don't go telling the people of this committee who know better who is the divisive person, who is the one that has been inciting violence in this election. And even if they don't believe us in this room, the American people have seen through it. That's why just today you saw nearly 500 military leaders join together, former military leaders, and civilian national security leaders, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, to say that they did not support this president because they were afraid of what was happening to our country and our democracy. So this hearing that we are about to have is about that very democracy. And so I don't think people really care about the fights we've had about this before. I think we missed a really important ingredient in what I've been hearing my colleagues say from across the aisle, and that is people are voting right now. They are voting on health care right now. The fact that we have a court case out of Texas that is coming up for oral argument on November 10th, in which, yes, pre-existing conditions are on the line because the argument was made that the whole Affordable Care Act should be thrown out. You cannot just fix that when you haven't been able to even take up the HEROES Act to do something about the pandemic. Yet, in fact, we see that we've got time to ram through a Supreme Court hearing in 2 weeks instead of spending those 2 weeks to actually take up the HEROES Act and help the people of this country. What else is on the line? Well, civil rights is on the line. When you look at the decisions and all the money that has flowed into our politics from the outside as a result of this current court's decision that is dominated by nominees put forward by Republican presidents. Women's rights, oh yeah, they are on the line. And as those fires were blazing on the west coast of our country, even the right to regulate our environment and do something to protect our air and water, that is on the line. So this hearing will not be divorced from what is happening right now because this president has put it right in the middle of a political campaign. That's his choice, not our choice. So I don't see this as theater, as you described, Senator Cruz. I see this as the real world. I see this deeply personally because I know that we have a president in place that knew that this virus was deadly. He knew that it was airborne, and yet my family, we were just trying to clean off the surfaces all the time and wash our hands, and then my husband ends up in the hospital with COVID on oxygen because this president didn't share with us the information he had at the time. All of that is going to be on the line. So we will look at this nominee, and we will look carefully at this nominee. That is our job, but we cannot get away from the fact that the process that puts her before us will be one that is not respecting the democracy that we are supposed to cherish. I have listened to this for too long, and I think the American people see through this raw use of political power. That is why they're voting in droves. So if you think you can get away from this just by trying to get this nominee through and no one's going to notice what she stands for or what her views are and how that's going to play into decisions that are made that affect people's lives, they already know. They're voting now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
America is a great country, and America is a country that was founded on the premise of white supremacy and white superiority. I know you have heard in this entire debate, well, there's a difference between heritage and hate. And there's a difference between Southern culture and slavery. And the monuments are celebrating heritage. They're celebrating culture. They're celebrating Southern pride. And people have understood these code words for a long time. So, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. And what greets me as a citizen of Tennessee when I go to my state capital in Nashville, where my grandparents lived? Nathan Bedford Forrest. Well, he made a fortune in Memphis as a slave trader, and he was the original Grand Wizard of the KKK. He led a Confederate massacre of black soldiers and white soldiers, American soldiers, during the Civil War. And this monument wasn't put up in 1865 or 1866 with people saying he's such a hero, we have to recognize him. This monument was built in 1970, 2 years after Martin Luther King was shot in the neck just down the road from Nashville, Tennessee. And we'll come to that timing as we go through this, because the timing of these monuments, I think, suggests something that's very important in terms of understanding what they're about. When were these monuments built? There were two spikes between the end of the 1800s and about 1921. What else was going on at the exact same time in America? The fact that this was normal, the fact that this was behavior that didn't really shock anybody, tells you something about how deeply white supremacy has been ingrained into American culture. 1921, the black community in Tulsa, Oklahoma was one of the most prosperous communities in America, and the whites there decided they weren't gonna have it. So they simply burned it to the ground. Almost 300 people killed. That's what was going on at the exact same time. Was this explosion of Confederate monuments, an explosion of thanks and praise for people who had done nothing other than fight to maintain white supremacy and slavery. When you think about when these monuments were built and what else was going on in America, it tells you something about the motivation. So how about that second, 1947 to 1968? One thing that people forget about our history is that Reconstruction after the Civil War was actually working. there were over 2,000 black elected officials in America. Businesses that blacks were starting to take hold. And in 1877, I think it was Grover, I can't remember the president, but he got elected and basically said, I'm withdrawing the troops. In 1876, there were 125,000 black registered voters in Louisiana. In 1878, that number dropped to 5,000. And if you're wondering about the flag, it had essentially been dead and buried until 1948, when Strom Thurmond brought it back with the Dixiecrat Party. And once again, they are telling us as clearly as they can what they are about and why they're waving that flag. The party's purpose was clear: we stand for segregation of the races. This is from the editor of the Augusta, Georgia Courier in 1951. Folks, they are saying it as plainly as they can. And yet, we are still having a debate in this country about what this stuff means. I am going through this to try and show you the events that were happening at the same time that this second explosion of monuments in the South to Confederate heroes was being built. And then this happened in '63. Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, and just a few weeks later, the Confederate flag was flying over the University of Alabama. And in September of 1963, these 4 girls got blown up in this church. This was the young girl that survived. These are the faces of people watching the bodies being taken out of the church. This is what was happening as the second explosion of Confederate monuments was happening in America. So, some of these statues are coming down. They're being removed in the dark of night because the city officials don't want to remove them in the day because there might be disputes, there might be violence, there might be fighting. My only point is this: there is a movement in America that has not been in existence in my lifetime. I was 11 years old in Memphis when King was shot and killed. And I was young, but I was old enough to know enough. And what I'm telling you is the discussions about racial equality that were going on then are nowhere near as deep, as intense, and as revealing as the discussions that are going on today. As scared as I feel and as frustrated as I feel with what's going on in this country, there is a part of me that says we are on the cusp of something. This is a freaking tipping point. And it is going to go one way or the other. Taking down these monuments will not cure the problem, but it is at least an indication that we are ready to deal with the truth.
Exhausted from appearing in every Republican's nightmares?
No, I think that's a very comfortable role for me.
Okay.
If you're full of bull, I'm coming for you. Like, I just don't have time. I'm a single mom, the dinner's burning, I'm late to something, I have 4,000 emails, my hair is frizzy, I haven't shaved my legs in a week. No bull.
There was a billionaire named Jamie Dimon who was head of what bank?
JP Morgan.
JP Morgan Chase, okay, and you sort of became famous because you shamed him.
Mr. Dimon, you know how to spend $31 million a year in salary, and you can't figure out how to make up a $567 a month shortfall. This is a budget problem you cannot solve. I think, to be fair, Bill, I think he shamed himself.
Well, you helped.
I think people think that teachers love their good students best. I actually really treasure all those students who showed up unprepared, hungover, dumb, whatever they were, because they really prepared me for what it's going to be like to question witnesses in Congress. The disparity in REO rates. Do you know what an REO is?
An Oreo?
No, not an Oreo. An REO. REO.
Real estate?
I have to say, people always ask me, like, how do I plan for those kinds of moments? You can't plan for someone to be that dumb.
I have read that every day you give your kids a coronavirus briefing.
True.
On a scale of Cuomo to Trump, where do your briefings land?
The information is accurate, so that would put it really far from the Trump spectrum, but it's kind of a little bit harsher than Cuomo.
Okay.
They're not so chit-chatty. I'm not as warm and we're all in this together. I'm more like, if you don't behave, you're going to die. Some people think that Democrats can't stick to their positions, but here's my position. Dying is bad.
You also are known for using props.
I had like a bingo board.
Well, you actually, we brought the bingo board here.
Oh, nice. These were all words actually that were used in one of the witnesses' testimony. And it's the same kind of stuff, like, you know, incentivize consumers. Well, like, how about we incentivize corporations not to cheat people?
Right.
Like, how about that? You know, it's always unintended consequences. You know, oh, says Wells Fargo, those were just some inconsequential violations where we stole all the people's money. And so these are just the same kinds of excuses that I hear, and I just wanted to call out the witness, and basically I was going to check off every time she gave one of these. A lot of my colleagues don't get this, and so they'll say to me, like, wow, Katie, like, you're a freshman, but you're so good at asking questions. Like, do you have any tips? And so it's really hard to figure out how you say politely, like, well, the first tip is ask a question. If you still have a flip phone and you're a member of Congress, it's time to trade that model up.
And some, of course, are speaking.
You laugh as if that's like a small caucus. I mean, the flip phone caucus has double-digit membership. And it's a bipartisan caucus, I want to add. The number one thing that I hear every day from my colleagues is, Joe, I think you need to mute your phone. I will tell you the number of people who have offered me sourdough starter in the last week is in the double digits. And to be clear, I don't have time for that. Dying is bad.
Dr. Fauci.
Our next expert is Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Tony knows what to do.
Dr. Anthony S. Fauci.
Tony and I.
We turn now to Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fauci.
My name is Dr. Tony Fauci. I'm the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at NIH.
Even as a boy, Tony was distinguished by his courage. In a neighborhood full of Brooklyn Dodgers fans, he rooted for the Yankees.
So I was in an Italian and American section called Bensonhurst, and it was a very family-oriented, very warm, nurturing. My father is first generation. His father was born in Italy, came to the United States at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. They called him Doc. Back then, pharmacists were called Doc because many people who either couldn't afford to go to a doctor or didn't want to take the time of making an appointment would go in to their neighborhood pharmacy.
And he still quotes what he learned from Jesuit teaching: precision of thought, economy of expression. And now you know why he never ran for public office.
He was a great basketball player. Did anybody know that? He was a little on the short side for the NBA, but he was talented.
And graduated first in his class in 1966 at Cornell Medical College.
Noted public health scholars were opining and even testifying before the United States Congress that with the advent of antibiotics and vaccines and public health measures, quote, the war against infectious diseases had been won. At that time, I was on my way to begin, of all things, a fellowship in infectious diseases at the National Institutes of Health. I sort of felt like I was going to Miami to be a ski instructor.
Before this malady even had a name, it had a fierce opponent in Dr. Anthony Fauci.
This is a new disease, at least in the United States.
Just struck me as an oddity that otherwise healthy men and another oddity, otherwise healthy gay men, got an infection that you virtually never see in someone with a normal immune system. And at that point, it was like, oh my God, we're dealing with something new. I decided I was going to stop what I had been doing and devote myself completely to studying what I felt would be an enormously difficult disease, and it unfortunately turned out that that was the case.
And that's an issue that I really must emphasize over and over again, that there is no scientific evidence at all that it can be transmitted by casual contact.
One of the toughest decisions, I had a few, was when I made a decision during the middle of the early years of the AIDS pandemic to bring the activist community into our deliberations, because most of the scientific community, including my own staff, were totally against that.
But I think you have to...
If you start that business about science isn't done that way, I'm going to come down there and slap your face.
All right, Larry, hang on for a second.
Remarkably, he has gone from being burned in effigy by AIDS activists in the early days of the epidemic to winning their trust and respect.
You know, I want to say something about Tony Fauci, because I think the world must think I hate him or something, the way I'm going on tonight. I love Tony. Actually, I think I probably have a more complicated relationship with Tony than anybody in my entire life. He is a man, an ordinary man, who is being asked to play God. And he is being punished because he cannot be God. And that is a terrible situation to be in, to be the lightning rod for all of us. But he is there, and he has been this incredible fighter for us and for AIDS.
I love you, Larry.
How many presidents have you known personally?
Essentially all of them to a different degree. I knew President George H.W. Bush very well.
Who are the ones that you would point out to young Americans as figures who should inspire this country?
I think of Dr. Fauci. Probably never heard of him. Well, you did. Ann heard of him. He's a very fine research, top doctor at National Institute of Health, working hard doing something about research on this disease of AIDS.
I didn't see the debate. I was out of town coming in on a plane, and the next morning when I walked into the NIH, as I walked into the lobby, people started going like this, and I said, what is this all about? I said, what do you mean what's this all about? The president called you a hero during a national debate that was seen by 100 million people, and I was totally surprised.
For his determined and aggressive efforts to help others live longer and healthier lives, I'm proud to award the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Dr. Anthony S. Fauci.
Got to be quite close with President George W. Bush. He took a very keen interest in global HIV/AIDS and allowed me to be one of the architects of the program, which has now transformed HIV globally, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR.
but we can end it as a global pandemic. It's within our grasp. It was started and sustained by the phenomenal work of our president, and we just need as a society to just take it over the goal line. And I think we can do it. I really do, Barbara. I believe we can.
Under 6 administrations, who has been the coolest president that you have worked with?
Well, there's not a chance in the world I'm going to answer that one. Leadership takes many forms, including the quiet leadership of example.
I said earlier today that I hope we can do this by Easter.
You don't make the timeline. The virus makes the timeline.
Anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're there. They have the tests. And the tests are beautiful.
The idea of anybody getting it easily, the way people in other countries are doing it, we're not set up for that. Do I think we should be? Yes, but we're not.
Now, you're 74.
Right.
How long are you going to work?
I'm just going to keep doing it until I'm not effective. And right now I'm as energetic and I believe as effective as I've ever been.
Fauci.
No one ever makes $1 billion. You take $1 billion. First of all, it's like we have to update, what is it, Mark Twain, that says, you know, everyone's just a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. Now everyone's a temporarily embarrassed billionaire. And this idea that that we can't, and also in a democracy, the government is us. Like, can we just remember that when we fight for full enfranchisement, when we don't deny the vote, when we don't have subjects, when we fight for a democracy for the people and by the people, the government is the public. And the public decides what is good for itself. And I think that the public has decided that healthcare as a right is worth fighting for, just like education and just like housing. But the problem is all of where the power has already been concentrated, and that having to break that monopoly on power or oligopoly on power.
I just want to drill down that a little bit more, though. Why specifically does, I'm Joe Billionaire, I made widgets, I sold those widgets, I made billions of dollars, selling those widgets, making those widgets. Therefore, those billions of dollars are mine. Why am I the enemy of healthcare?
Well, you didn't make those widgets, did you? Because you employed thousands of people and paid them less than a living wage to make those widgets for you. You didn't make those widgets. You sat on a couch while thousands of people were paid modern day slave wages, and in some cases real modern day slavery, depending on where you are in terms of food production. You made that money off the backs of undocumented people. You made that money off of the backs of black and brown people being paid off under a living wage. You made that money off of the backs of single mothers. And all of these people who are literally dying because they can't afford to live. And so no one ever makes $1 billion. You take $1 billion. This system that we live in, life in capitalism, always ends in billionaires. If you don't do it, someone else will. It's who decides to make that choice is kind of just up to, circumstance. But this thing that we live in starves people. And that's why we have to fight for an advanced society. And, for that, I am called a radical. I am called every name in the book. But I just happen to have the view that humanity has lived in many systems and many ways that we organized our society. We have lived through monarchy. We have lived through slaveocracy. We have lived, you know, in the times and societies that our ancestors established and were decimated. But all of this is temporary. Mercantilism is temporary. Slaveocracy evolved into Jim Crow, evolved into American apartheid. But I believe that mercantilism was temporary. And King talked about this too. You know, when we talk about King, no one talks about the dangerous king. No one talks about the anti-capitalist king. No one talks about the anti-poverty king. And I believe that where we are right now are at the edges of an untenable system that is starting to crack.